Welcome back to class. Today should actually be a relatively short topic. We're going to be reviewing the past continuous, as you can see here. If you haven't checked out any of the previous videos, I do recommend that you do that because a lot of the concepts that we've already reviewed are going to be used here again. Now, the last video we saw was the past simple. But the one I want you to focus on in terms of concepts is the present continuous, which I believe was previous to that one. So for the past continuous, the structure is essentially the same as the present continuous, but you're going to be changing the form of the verb be. I'm going to read these two examples first, and then we're going to analyze some of the changes. Okay. The first part says, I knocked on your door at noon, but you weren't at home. What were you doing? And in the second example, I was eating lunch with a friend. The first thing I want to point out, this example here is using this timeline, as you can see, because we're going to be describing the difference between the simple version, which is here in purple, and the continuous version, which is here in blue. As you can see, for the simple version, which is the word knocked, you're going to be focusing on a specific point in time, right? You're focusing specifically on the action and the moment the action happened. Of course, since we're in the past, then we're using the past simple. So that's this purple action here. Now for the continuous, you're also, of course, referring to an action, but you're also focusing more on the time. So how long it lasted. Because, as we've seen before, continuous verbs focus on one action happening over a period of time with no interruptions in the middle. So in this case, the action we're talking about is lunch, right? And you can see in the timeline, it starts at around 11:30 and it finishes at around 12:30. So it takes up a whole hour, the activity, right? So that's the difference in terms of purpose. Now let's focus on what's new, which is the difference in terms of the structure. What you can see in the simple is what we reviewed previously in other videos. You only have one verb, and that verb is in the past. In this case, knock is regular, so you add the ed, and you're left with knocked as the T sound at the end. For the continuous version, you're going to be using two verbs. One of these is going to be familiar, or it should be familiar if you already know the present continuous. So for example, eating, you're going to notice it has the ing ending, which is very characteristic for continuous. Okay, it's used in some other situations, but right now let's just focus on continuous. So you will notice that. This other verb here, was, we reviewed in the past simple, so you should know that was is the past form of be. Okay? The other past form of be is were, which you have here in the introduction, was or were. Those are the two that you're going to be using always in the past continuous. Now, if you remember from the present, what you would use was, of course, the present form of be, which you had three options. It could be is, am, and are. Those were the three. Here, a little bit easier because you only have two options. Okay? So for the structure of the continuous, you're always going to have the verb be because that's your auxiliary verb. Okay? It's like your little helper. It's always going to be there. And then the main verb, which is the actual action that you're doing, is going to be in its continuous form. Okay. It's technically called a present participle, but you don't have to worry about the technicalities that much. All right. I think that covers basically everything in terms of structure, at least for the essential part. Here at the bottom of the page, you'll see you have the structure again. So subject, was, and were, and then the verb plus ing, which is the present participle. Now, pay attention, it's called present participle, but we're currently in the past. And the reason you know it's past is because you're using the past form of be. I'm going to read these 4 examples here, just so you have more reference. This time last week, we were hiking in Peru. When I lost my camera, we were swimming in the sea. He didn't go out because he was working late. The last time I saw him, he was washing his car. Okay, so the first 2, they're using were because we have plural. Remember, were is used for plural. And then the next 2 is using was because it's singular. You're only talking about one person. You're going to notice the structure is always the same. So that's the first page. Now let's focus on the next page. All right, so let's start reviewing the second page. Here, we're going to get into some of the specific situations where you want to use the past continuous. You're going to see in this first part that it says the past continuous for scene setting. If you don't know what scene setting is, it means to prepare a scene, which essentially is describing something. You're going to give context about a situation. Now, normally, this can be for stories or for anecdotes, like if you're telling something to someone, maybe about what happened yesterday. If you want to be detailed in the way that you tell the story or the anecdote, then you're going to provide a description. And in that description, the past continuous allows you to describe the different actions that were happening. So I'm going to read the paragraph here, and I'm going to focus on some of the details. Okay, I'm going to highlight some parts. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. Children were laughing and playing in the street. You'll see this is a very short paragraph that has 3 sentences. And we use the past continuous technically 4 times. In the second sentence, we have 2 things we're talking about. First, the sun, which is singular, so we use was, and then the birds, which is plural, so we use were. Since we're talking about 2 different things that are also doing different actions, then they're separated. Okay, so the sun was shining and the birds were singing. In the third sentence, it's a little bit different because we're only talking about one thing, which is children. Children, being plural, uses were. Now, we have 2 verbs here, laughing and playing. The reason why we have 2 verbs is because the children were doing 2 actions at the same time. So if you're describing one thing that is doing multiple actions simultaneously, you can create a list. In this case, there are only 2 actions, so we connect both of them using this connector, and. If you want to make a list with longer actions, so maybe 3, 4, 5, or more, you're going to connect all the verbs with commas and then leave the connector for the last 2 ideas. So for example, I could say, children were laughing, dancing, and playing. In this case, I have three actions. Laughing and dancing are going to be separated by a comma, and then dancing and playing are separated by and. Okay? Now, technically, you could say children were laughing and children were playing in the street. This creates two situations. The first one, it could sound redundant if you're talking about the same group of children, right? Now, the second situation is you're talking about two different groups of children that are doing two different things, two different actions. So, one group of children were laughing and another group of children were playing. In that case, perfectly acceptable to separate them because although you're using children in both cases as the subject, they're doing different things. And you're describing two different groups of children. Okay? Now, this is important because when we move to the next part, which is the past continuous and the past simple, you're going to notice that the past continuous is going to be used a lot for descriptions. Okay, so I'm going to read this and then I'm going to explain it a little bit. When English uses the past continuous and past simple together, the past continuous describes a longer background action, and the past simple describes a shorter action that interrupts the background action. I was taking a photo when a monkey grabbed my camera. This is a combination of two different verb tenses, past continuous and past simple, and they work together because they describe different things. Okay, so they complement each other. Past continuous, as we've said, is very useful for describing. So in this case, you're going to use it to describe the context. So the situation that was happening. Okay. In this case, I was taking a photo. That's past continuous, and that's what was happening. Now, the past simple is more focused on the specific action. It's going to be your main action in the sentence. And it's also going to interrupt the continuous action. So here, a monkey grabbed my camera. You can see from the pictures that the person has to stop taking the photo because the monkey grabs the camera, right? You can't continue to take a photo if you don't have your camera. So the description is given with past continuous, and the main action or the interruption is given with the past simple. Now here it follows that same order. As you can see, first we give the description and then we give the main action. But I can choose to swap or switch the two in the structure, not the tense. Okay? So for example, I could say, a monkey grabbed my camera while I was taking a photo. So I'm first talking about the main action, and then I'm giving you the context or the description of the situation. It's exactly the same sentence. Sometimes you need to change the connector, but that's really the only thing. So this means you have to pay attention to the verb tense to know if you're talking about the main action or if you're talking about the context. Okay? Let me read the further examples. He was sunbathing when it started to rain. She was sleeping when the phone rang. I was mowing the lawn when you called. I was having a bath when you knocked. You can see all of these follow exactly the same structure we saw before. You have a description of the situation using the past continuous. He was sunbathing, I was mowing the lawn, she was sleeping, I was having a bath. Okay, descriptions using past simple. And then you have the main action interrupting the description using the past simple. Okay, the description is the past continuous. Sorry, I think I said that wrong initially. But the description is the past continuous, and the interruption is the past simple. So it started to rain, you called, the phone rang, you knocked. You can see all of those are simple, all of those are the main action in the sentence, all of those are interrupting the context. So the person stops sunbathing when it starts to rain. The person stops mowing the lawn when someone calls, right? The person stops sleeping when the phone rings, and the person stops taking a bath when the person knocks. Same thing I did with this one. I can also switch these around. So I could say the phone rang while she was sleeping, or you called while I was mowing the lawn. Exactly the same sentence. The only thing I'm really doing is changing the connector. And sometimes you don't even have to change it. So you'll probably learn that with time as you hear some of these. But just remember, pay attention to these longer sentences to know what is the main action, like what's the focus, and then what is the actual description of the context. Now, this is technically the end, but we can also review the negatives and questions. Now, I don't plan on making a separate video unless a lot of people have questions and you ask me to do so. But the reason why I don't plan on doing so initially is because it follows the same rules as the present continuous. And I'm going to give you some examples now so you can see that it is very easy. I'm only going to focus on the past continuous part of these examples. We're going to ignore the past simple. Okay? So, he was sunbathing. If you remember how to make the question, you have to switch or swap the subject or the person and then the auxiliary verb, which in this case is was. So instead of saying he was sunbathing, you would say, was he sunbathing? Okay, you switch those two. If you want to make it open, easy, just add a question word. So you could say, when was he sunbathing? Where was he sunbathing? Why was he sunbathing? Easy, okay? Now, in the case that you want to make a negative, again, it's the same as the present continuous. If you remember, you have to add not after the verb be. So in this case, the verb be is was. You can say he was not sunbathing. And it's the same for the others. I was not mowing the lawn. She was not sleeping. I was not having a bath. Hopefully, that is enough to clear the idea for questions and negatives. But again, if you have doubts with that, ask me and I'll try to answer and possibly make a video about it if a lot of people ask me to do so. But if not, then the next video you'll see is probably going to be the next verb tense, which we continue to be in the past. Anyways, good luck with your learning endeavor, and I hope to see you soon.